The woman's ragged breathing echoed through the stable just before dawn, and Hayes Rourke froze with his hand on the barn door, every muscle in his body tensing as he registered the unfamiliar sound among his horses. He had built his life in these mountains above Sierra City, California, precisely because he valued solitude. The year was 1875, and Hayes had spent the last 8 years carving out an existence in the wilderness after the war had taken everything he cared about. His cabin sat tucked into a valley where few travelers ventured, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound through pine forests so thick they blocked out the midday sun. At 32, he stood well over 6 feet tall, his shoulders broad from years of chopping wood and hauling supplies up the mountainside. His dark hair fell past his collar, and his arms were corded with muscle that came from genuine labor rather than idle strength. He kept to himself, made the occasional trip down to Sierra City for supplies, and preferred the company of his horses to most people he had known. Now, someone had invaded his sanctuary. Hayes pushed open the stable door slowly, his eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the cracks in the wooden walls. His 3 horses stood in their stalls, restless and alert. In the far corner, half buried in the hay, he saw her. She was curled into herself, her dress torn and muddy, her dark blonde hair tangled with bits of straw. Even in sleep, her face bore the marks of exhaustion and fear. Bruises darkened her jaw and one cheekbone. Her hands were scraped raw, fingernails broken and bleeding. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old. Hayes stood perfectly still, weighing his options. He could wake her and send her on her way. He could pretend he never saw her and let her rest until she moved on herself. Or he could do what his conscience demanded and offer help to someone who clearly needed it. Before he could decide, the sound of hoofbeats reached his ears, multiple riders moving fast up the trail toward his property. The woman's eyes flew open. They were a striking shade of amber, bright with terror. She saw him and scrambled backward, pressing herself against the stable wall. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Please do not tell them I am here." Hayes heard the voices now, harsh and angry, growing closer. "Track goes this way, I'm telling you." She could not have gone far. "Mountain Man's place is just ahead. Maybe he has seen something. Or maybe he is hiding her. Would not be the first time some hermit took in a stray." Hayes made his decision in the span of a heartbeat. He crossed to the woman in 3 long strides, scooped her up despite her startled gasp, and carried her out of the stable. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, all fragile bones and terrified trembling. He took her into his cabin, moving quickly to a storage space he had built beneath the floorboards for preserving food during the winter. It was just large enough for a person to crouch inside. "Get in," he said quietly. "Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear." She looked at him with those amber eyes, searching his face for something. Trust, perhaps, or just the reassurance that he would not hand her over to whoever was hunting her. Then she climbed down into the space, folding herself small. Hayes replaced the boards and threw a bearskin rug over them. He scattered his supplies across the floor to make the cabin look lived in and natural, then walked back outside just as 3 riders crested the ridge. They were rough men, the kind Hayes recognized from his years of dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. The leader sat a paint horse, his face weathered and mean. The other 2 flanked him, hands resting on their gun belts in a casual threat. "Morning," Hayes said, his voice flat and unwelcoming. "Morning," the leader replied, not bothering with pleasantries. "We are looking for a woman, brown hair, about this tall." He gestured vaguely. "Stole something valuable and ran off last night. You seen anyone coming through here?" Hayes let his gaze drift over them slowly, taking in every detail. The leader had cold eyes and a scar running from his temple to his jaw. The man on the left was younger, nervous, his hand twitching near his revolver. The one on the right was built thick and solid, with the look of someone who enjoyed violence. "No one comes through here," Hayes said. "That is why I live here." "Mind if we take a look around?" the leader asked, though his tone made it clear it was not really a question. Hayes did mind, but 3 armed men presented a problem he could not solve with his fists alone. "Stable is open. Cabin is mine. You can check the stable." The thick man dismounted and headed for the stable, while the other 2 watched Hayes carefully. He stood with his arms loose at his sides, projecting an image of calm indifference while his mind raced. If they found any trace of her in the stable, any sign that someone had been there recently, they would tear his cabin apart. "You live up here all alone?" the younger man asked, trying to sound conversational. "Yes." "Must get lonely." Hayes did not respond. He had learned years ago that silence made people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people made mistakes. The thick man emerged from the stable, shaking his head. "Nothing. Horses are spooked, though." "Mountain lions been around lately?" the leader asked Hayes. "Could be." The leader studied him for a long moment, and Hayes met his gaze without flinching. Finally, the man nodded. "You see a woman matching that description? You let the sheriff in Sierra City know. There is a reward." "What did she steal?" Hayes asked. "Does not matter to you, just remember what I said." They turned their horses and rode back down the trail, but Hayes noticed the leader glance back twice before they disappeared into the trees. He waited, counting slowly to 200, before he returned to the cabin. The woman was exactly where he had left her, huddled in the dark space beneath his floor. When he lifted the boards, she looked up at him with such relief and gratitude that something in his chest tightened uncomfortably. "They are gone," he said, offering his hand. She took it, and he pulled her up into the light. Now that he could see her properly, he realized she was trembling, not just from fear, but from cold and exhaustion. Her dress, once probably a decent traveling outfit, was ruined beyond repair. Her feet were bare and bloody. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday morning, maybe the day before. I'm not sure." Hayes guided her to the chair by his fireplace and stirred up the embers, adding fresh wood until flames began to lick at the logs. He pulled out his supplies and started preparing food, aware of her watching him with wary confusion. "What is your name?" he asked as he sliced bread and cheese. "Olivia," she said softly. "Olivia Zimmerman." "Hayes Rourke." He set the food in front of her along with a cup of water from his well. "Eat slowly, or you will be sick." She picked up the bread with shaking hands and took a small bite, then another. He could see her forcing herself to go slow when she clearly wanted to devour everything in front of her. While she ate, he heated water and gathered clean cloths. "Those men," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "They said you stole something." Olivia's hand stilled. "I did not steal anything that was not already mine." "Want to explain that?" She set down the bread and looked into the fire. "My father died 6 months ago. He owned a mine, not a big one, but it produced enough gold to keep us comfortable. When he died, his partner claimed the mine was entirely his. He said my father had sold his share to cover debts, but that is a lie. I have the original partnership papers proving my father owned half. I took them from the office 3 nights ago because I knew if I did not, they would disappear forever." The partner sent those men. "His name is Victor Gaines. He runs most of the gambling and drinking establishments in Sierra City, and he has enough men on his payroll to make himself untouchable. I thought I could take the papers to the territorial judge in Sacramento, but Gaines found out I had them. He sent those men to get them back and to make sure I could not testify about what he did." Hayes absorbed this information while he tested the water temperature. "Where are the papers now?" Olivia touched her bodice, and he understood she had hidden them close to her body. "I could not let them have these. They are all I have left of my father, all the proof that he existed and that he mattered. They will keep looking for you." "I know." Her voice broke slightly. "I'm sorry I brought this to your door. I was running through the darkness, and I saw your stable, and I just needed to rest for a moment. I did not mean to fall asleep. I will leave as soon as I can walk properly." Hayes looked at her bloody feet, her bruised face, her exhausted eyes. "You will stay here until you heal. Those men will be watching the trails for the next few days at least. I cannot ask you to risk yourself for me." "You did not ask. I am telling you." He brought the warm water and cloths to her. "Let me see your feet." Olivia hesitated, then slowly lifted one foot. The sole was torn and punctured with splinters. Hayes knelt in front of her, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he began to clean the wounds. She flinched but did not pull away. "This will hurt," he warned, picking splinters out with careful precision. "It already hurts," she replied, but there was the faintest hint of humor in her voice. They fell into silence as he worked, cleaning and bandaging both feet, then examining her hands. Her fingernails were ragged from clawing her way up rocky slopes, her palms scraped raw. He treated those injuries as well, aware of how small her hands looked in his. "Thank you," Olivia said when he finished. "You did not have to help me." "No," Hayes agreed. He stood and moved to put away his supplies, needing some distance from the strange feelings her presence stirred in him. "But I did anyway." "Why?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because someone needed help, and I was there to give it. It does not need to be more complicated than that." But even as he said it, Hayes knew it was more complicated. He had seen plenty of trouble in Sierra City over the years, seen plenty of people in bad situations, and he had always kept to himself. Something about Olivia Zimmerman was different. Maybe it was the determination he saw in her eyes despite her fear, or the way she had clutched those papers like they were worth more than her life. Maybe it was simply that he had been alone for too long, and some part of him recognized another lonely soul. "You should rest," he said. "Take the bed. I will keep watch." "I cannot take your bed." "You can, and you will. I have slept in worse places." Olivia looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She limped to his bed, a simple frame with a cornhusk mattress and wool blankets, and lowered herself onto it with a sigh of relief. Within minutes, she was asleep. Hayes sat by the window, his rifle across his knees, and watched the trail. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the mountain mist. His mind worked through the problem methodically. Victor Gaines was a dangerous man with resources and connections. If Olivia was telling the truth about the mine, Gaines would not stop looking for her until he had those papers, and silenced her permanently. The territorial judge in Sacramento was more than a week's journey from here, longer if they had to avoid the main roads. He glanced at the woman sleeping in his bed. She had turned onto her side, one hand tucked under her cheek, and for the first time since he had found her, her face looked peaceful. She was beautiful, he realized, beneath the dirt and bruises. But more than that, she had fought her way up a mountain in the dark with torn feet rather than surrender. That took a kind of strength he respected. The afternoon passed slowly. Hayes made a venison stew, the rich smell filling the cabin. Olivia woke near sunset, disoriented at first, then relaxing when she remembered where she was. "How long did I sleep?" she asked, her voice rough. "Most of the day. There is food if you are hungry." She sat up carefully, testing her bandaged feet. "I feel like I was trampled by horses." "You look like it too," Hayes said, and was rewarded with a small, surprised laugh. "Honesty, I appreciate that." He ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to her. This time, she ate with more control, though he could tell she was still ravenous. While she ate, he prepared his own meal, and they shared the simple dinner in comfortable quiet. "You live alone," Olivia said eventually. "Have you always been up here?" 8 years. That's a long time to be isolated." Hayes shrugged. "I prefer it." "No family?" "Not anymore." His tone made it clear the subject was closed, and Olivia nodded, not pushing. "I understand. My mother died when I was young. It was just my father and me after that. He taught me everything about mining, about rock formations and ore quality, and how to work a sluice box. I think he forgot sometimes that I was supposed to be learning embroidery and social graces instead." She smiled at the memory. "When he died, I realized I had nothing except what he left me, and now Gaines is trying to take that too." "You said you have partnership papers. That should be enough for a judge." "Should be, but Gaines has money and influence. I am just the daughter of a dead miner. Without someone to stand with me, to corroborate what I am saying, the judge might dismiss my claim entirely." Hayes considered this. "Did your father have friends? Other miners who knew about the partnership?" "A few, but they work claims in areas Gaines controls. They would not risk their livelihoods to help me." "What about in Sacramento? Anyone there who knew your father?" Olivia's expression brightened slightly. "There is a man, Jonathan Blake. He is a mining engineer who helped my father survey the claim when they first found the vein. He visited us several times over the years. If I could reach him, he might be willing to testify about the original partnership." "Do you know where to find him?" "He has an office in Sacramento. At least he did 2 years ago when he last visited." Hayes nodded slowly. "Then we need to get you to Sacramento." "We?" Olivia looked at him in surprise. "You would come with me? You think you can make it there alone, with Gaines's men looking for you?" No, but I cannot ask you to abandon your home for weeks, maybe longer. You are not asking. I am offering. Hayes met her eyes. Those men will come back. If they figure out I lied to them, they will burn this place to the ground. Better I leave for a while anyway. Let things settle. You are risking everything for someone you do not even know. Maybe I'm tired of playing it safe. The truth was more complicated than that, but Hayes did not know how to explain the feeling that had settled over him since finding Olivia in his stable. For 8 years, he had existed rather than lived, going through the motions of survival without any real purpose. Suddenly, he had something to do, someone to protect. It felt right in a way nothing had felt since before the war. When can we leave? Olivia asked. Few days. Give your feet time to heal enough for walking, and give Gaines's men time to expand their search area. They will expect you to run, so they will be watching the roads leading away from Sierra City. We will go a different direction first, loop around through the high country where they will not expect anyone to travel. That will add time to the journey. Better slow and alive than fast and dead. Olivia could not argue with that logic. They finished their meal, and Hayes insisted she return to the bed while he made a pallet by the fire. She protested again, but he simply ignored her until she gave in. The next few days fell into a strange routine. Hayes tended to his horses and his property, always keeping an eye on the trail for signs of riders. Olivia rested and recovered, her feet healing faster than he expected. She was tougher than she looked, he decided. She did not complain about her injuries or her situation, and she insisted on helping with whatever tasks she could manage from the cabin. He found her attempting to mend her torn dress on the second day. "Leave it," he said. "You cannot travel in that anyway." "I do not have anything else." Hayes rummaged through a trunk in the corner and pulled out clothes that had belonged to his younger brother. Thomas had been smaller than Hayes, slight and wiry, and his clothes would fit Olivia better than anything of Hayes's would. He had kept them for 8 years, unable to throw away the last remnants of his family. "Here," he said, handing her canvas trousers, a shirt, and a wool jacket. "For traveling." Olivia took the clothes carefully. "These belong to someone important to you." "My brother. He died in the war." "I'm sorry." Hayes nodded once and turned away before she could say anything else. He heard her moving behind him, changing into the borrowed clothes, and when he glanced back he saw they fit reasonably well. She had rolled up the cuffs of the trousers and cinched the belt tight, and with her hair pulled back, she looked almost like a young man. Almost. Her face was too delicate, her features too fine, but from a distance, the disguise might work. "Better," he said. "Safer to travel if people think you are a boy. I doubt I can pass for a boy up close. Then we will avoid getting close to people." On the third day, Hayes took Olivia outside for the first time. Her feet were still tender, but she could walk without wincing at every step. He had her practice moving around the property, testing her endurance, making sure she could handle the journey ahead. "We will be covering rough terrain," he explained. 10 to 15 miles a day, depending on the conditions. If you cannot keep up, tell me immediately. Better to rest than to push yourself until you collapse. "I can keep up," Olivia said with determination, and Hayes believed her. That evening, they sat on the porch of his cabin and watched the sun set over the mountains. The sky blazed orange and pink, and the air carried the sharp scent of pine. Hayes was aware of Olivia beside him, aware of how comfortable her presence had become in just a few days. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Depends on the question. Why did you really come up here, to these mountains?" Hayes was silent for so long she probably thought he would not answer. Finally, he spoke. "I was a soldier, fought for the Union. I saw things, did things that I'm not proud of. When the war ended, I went home to find my family's farm burned, my parents and brother dead. There was nothing left for me there, nothing left anywhere. So I came here where the war could not touch me, where I did not have to remember." "But you still remember," Olivia said softly. "Every day." She reached out and placed her hand on his, a simple gesture of comfort. Hayes looked down at their joined hands, hers so small and pale against his scarred, work-roughened skin, and something in his chest cracked open. "Thank you for telling me," she said. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They sat together as darkness fell, and for the first time in 8 years, Hayes did not feel entirely alone. The next morning, they prepared to leave. Hayes packed supplies carefully: dried meat, hardtack, coffee, blankets, ammunition. He had 2 horses, his big bay gelding named General and a smaller sorrel mare called Rosie. Olivia would ride Rosie while Hayes rode General and led his 3rd horse, a sturdy pack animal loaded with their gear. "You know how to ride?" he asked Olivia. "My father taught me." "Good. Stay close, watch the trail, and if I tell you to hide or run, you do it immediately without question. Understood?" "Understood." They set out just after dawn, taking a narrow trail that led up into the high country rather than down toward Sierra City. The morning was cool and crisp, the sky a brilliant blue between the towering pines. Hayes set an easy pace, letting the horses warm up gradually while he watched Olivia for signs of fatigue. She rode well, he noticed, with a natural seat and gentle hands. She had not lied about her father teaching her. They climbed steadily through the morning, the trail winding between massive rock formations and across rushing streams swollen with snowmelt. The higher they went, the thinner the air became, and Hayes called for regular rest stops to let Olivia adjust. "We will make camp early today," he told her during one such stop. "Let you build up your strength." "I am fine," Olivia insisted, but he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "You are recovering from running for your life. You're not fine yet, but you will be. Just give it time." They continued until mid-afternoon, then stopped in a sheltered meadow with good grass for the horses and a clear view of their back trail. Hayes set up camp with practiced efficiency, while Olivia tended to the horses, brushing them down and checking their hooves without being asked. She knew her way around animals, he observed, another sign of her father's teachings. That night, they sat by the fire and ate beans and bacon. The stars overhead were so bright and numerous they seemed to fill the entire sky. Hayes found himself telling Olivia about his childhood on the farm in Ohio, about his brother Thomas, who had loved books and learning, about his mother's garden and his father's workshop. Stories he had not shared with anyone in years poured out of him in the firelight, and Olivia listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions or sharing her own memories of growing up in mining camps throughout California. "My father was a dreamer," she said with affection. "He always believed the next claim would be the big one, the strike that would make us rich. Most of the time we barely scraped by, but he never lost his optimism. When he finally found that vein 3 years ago, I thought all his dreams had come true. He was so happy. And then Victor Gaines came along with his smooth talk and his promises, and my father believed him when he said they should be partners." "Your father was not a fool for trusting someone," Hayes said. "No, but he was not a good judge of character. He saw the best in everyone. I was always the suspicious one, the one who questioned people's motives. I told him Gaines could not be trusted, but he would not listen. He said I was too cynical for someone so young." Her voice caught. "I wish I had been wrong. What happened to your father? How did he die?" Olivia stared into the fire. Officially, it was a heart attack. He collapsed at the mine one day and was dead before they could get him to town. But my father was strong and healthy. He was only 48 years old. I think Gaines poisoned him, but I have no way to prove it." Hayes felt anger kindle in his chest, hot and fierce. "If that is true, then getting those papers to a judge is about more than money. It is about justice for your father." "Yes," Olivia whispered. "It is." They were quiet for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Olivia looked at him across the fire, her amber eyes reflecting the flames. "Why are you really doing this, Hayes? And do not tell me it is just because I needed help. You could have pointed me toward Sacramento and sent me on my way. Instead, you are risking your life to guide me there yourself." Hayes considered his answer carefully. "Maybe I'm tired of hiding from the world. Maybe I'm tired of letting bad things happen because I'm too afraid to get involved. Or maybe I just wanted a reason to care about something again. And I am that reason? You might be." The admission hung between them, heavy with meaning. Olivia held his gaze, and Hayes saw something shift in her expression, something warm and wondering. "I'm glad you found me," she said softly. "I'm glad it was your stable I collapsed in." "So am I." They sat together until the fire burned down to embers, neither wanting to break the moment. Finally, Hayes banked the coals and spread out their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. He lay awake for a long time, listening to Olivia's quiet breathing and wondering what he was getting himself into. He had not felt this way about anyone since before the war, had not allowed himself to feel this way. It was dangerous and complicated, and probably foolish. He was fairly certain he did not care. They traveled for 5 more days through the high country, following routes that only someone intimately familiar with the mountains could navigate. Hayes led them across boulder-strewn passes and through forests so dense they had to dismount and lead the horses. They saw no signs of other travelers, which was exactly what Hayes wanted. Each night, they made camp and talked by the fire. Hayes found himself looking forward to those conversations more than he wanted to admit. Olivia was smart and funny, with a quick wit that often caught him off guard. She asked about his life in the mountains, about the animals he encountered and the seasons he weathered, and she listened to his answers with genuine fascination. In turn, he learned more about her life. She told him about following her father from claim to claim throughout her childhood, about the makeshift schools and mining camps where she learned to read and write, about the rough but generally kind men who had looked after her when her father was working underground. She told him about her dreams of opening a school someday, using the money from the mine to give other children in mining communities a proper education. "That is a good dream," Hayes said. "It feels impossible now." "Nothing is impossible. You made it up a mountain in the dark with 3 men chasing you. If you can do that, you can do anything." Olivia smiled at him, and Hayes felt something in his chest tighten. He was falling for her, he realized, falling hard and fast in a way he had never experienced before. It terrified him. On the 6th day, they began descending from the high country, following a river valley that would eventually lead them to Sacramento. The terrain became easier, and they made better time. Hayes estimated they were still 4 or 5 days from the city, assuming they encountered no problems. They encountered a problem on the 7th day. They were following a wagon road through rolling foothills when Hayes spotted dust rising in the distance behind them. He immediately guided them off the road and into a grove of oak trees, dismounting and moving to Olivia's side. "Riders," he said quietly. "Could be anyone, but we are not taking chances." They waited in the shade, watching as 3 riders came into view. Hayes's jaw tightened. It was the same 3 men who had come to his cabin, the ones searching for Olivia. "How did they find us?" Olivia whispered, her voice tight with fear. "They did not. They are just covering ground, checking roads. Stay quiet." The riders passed within 50 yards of their hiding spot, close enough that Hayes could hear their conversation. "This is a waste of time," the younger one complained. "She is probably dead in the mountains by now." "Gaines does not pay us to think," the leader replied. "He pays us to search, so we search." They continued down the road and disappeared around a bend. Hayes waited another 10 minutes before leading them back onto the road, but now his mind was racing. If Gaines had men this far from Sierra City, he had more resources than Hayes had anticipated. "We need to change our approach," he said to Olivia. "If they are watching the roads, we will avoid them entirely. It will take longer, but it is safer." Olivia nodded, her face pale but determined. They turned off the road and headed cross-country, navigating by the sun and Hayes's knowledge of the terrain. It was slower going, and they had to backtrack twice when they encountered impassable obstacles, but Hayes preferred slow and careful to fast and captured. That night, they camped without a fire, eating cold food and huddling under blankets against the chill. Hayes sat with his back against a tree, his rifle across his knees, and watched the darkness for any sign of pursuit. Olivia sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You should sleep," he told her. "I am too anxious. Every sound makes me think they have found us." "They have not found us. I will keep watch." "Hayes," she turned to look at him, her face barely visible in the starlight. "What happens if they do find us, if we cannot make it to Sacramento?" "We will make it. But if we do not, then I will make sure you are safe, even if I have to fight all 3 of them myself. I do not want you to die for me." Hayes reached out and cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I've been half dead for 8 years, Olivia. You made me want to live again. That is worth fighting for." She drew in a shaky breath, and then she leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft and tentative, a question more than a demand, and Hayes answered by pulling her closer, deepening the kiss with all the longing he had been holding back. She tasted like hope and possibility, and when they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he said quietly, "when you have your justice and your mine and your dreams, I want to be part of your life, if you will have me." "Yes," Olivia whispered. "Yes, I will have you." They held each other in the darkness, and Hayes felt something he had not felt in years: happiness. The next 3 days passed without incident. They made their way slowly toward Sacramento, avoiding roads and settlements, living off the supplies Hayes had packed and the occasional rabbit he managed to shoot. Olivia's strength grew with each day, her step becoming surer, her spirits lifting as they drew closer to their destination. On the 11th day since leaving his cabin, they reached the outskirts of Sacramento. The city had grown significantly since Hayes had last visited, sprawling out from the river with new buildings and streets. The smell of civilization hit them first: smoke and sewage and too many people living too close together. "We need to find Jonathan Blake," Olivia said, pulling her hat low over her face to maintain her disguise as a young man. "His office should be near the river, where the mining companies do business." They rode into the city carefully, Hayes keeping a sharp eye out for anyone who might recognize Olivia or take too much interest in them. Sacramento was busy and chaotic, filled with miners, merchants, gamblers, and dreamers, all seeking their fortune. It was easy to disappear in the crowds, which worked in their favor. They found Blake's office in a narrow building near the waterfront. The sign outside read, "Blake Engineering and Survey," in faded gold letters. Hayes tied the horses and followed Olivia inside. The office was small and cluttered with maps, rock samples, and mining equipment. A man in his 50s looked up from a desk covered in papers, his spectacles sliding down his nose. "We are closed," he started to say, then stopped, his eyes widening. "Olivia? Olivia Zimmerman?" "Hello, Jonathan," Olivia said, pulling off her hat. "I need your help." Blake stood quickly, shock written across his face. "My God, child, I heard you were dead. Gaines sent word that you had died in a fall near the mine, that there was nothing left to bury." "Gaines is a liar and a murderer," Olivia said flatly. "He killed my father, stole his mine, and tried to kill me when I took proof of his theft. This is Hayes Rourke. He saved my life and helped me get here." Blake looked at Hayes, taking in his size and his bearing, and seemed to understand immediately what kind of man he was dealing with. "Thank you for protecting her." Hayes nodded. "Olivia, what proof do you have?" Blake asked. She pulled the folded papers from inside her shirt and spread them on his desk. Blake examined them carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "These are the original partnership agreements," he said. "I remember when your father signed these. He was so excited about the prospects. And these other documents, these show that Gaines has been systematically falsifying records to show sole ownership. This is fraud, clear as day." "Will you testify?" Olivia asked. "Will you help me present this to the territorial judge?" "Of course I will. Your father was a good man and a good friend. I will not let Gaines destroy his legacy." Blake straightened his spectacles. "The judge holds court 3 days a week. Tomorrow's one of those days. We can present the case then." "Will he hear us?" Hayes asked. "Will he listen to Olivia's claim against someone with Gaines's resources?" Judge Morrison is honest, one of the few truly honest men in this territory. If we present the evidence clearly, he will rule on the merits, not on politics. Blake looked at Olivia. "You will need to tell him everything, including how you obtained these papers and what happened afterward." "I will," Olivia said firmly. Blake nodded. "You both should stay here tonight. I have rooms upstairs. You will be safe, and we can prepare your testimony." They accepted gratefully. Blake led them upstairs to simple but clean rooms, and Olivia finally had a chance to wash properly and change into a dress that Blake's housekeeper provided. When she emerged, Hayes barely recognized her. Gone was the exhausted, frightened woman he had found in his stable. Gone was the rough boy in men's clothes who had ridden beside him through the mountains. In her place stood a striking woman with clean, shining hair and clear amber eyes, wearing a modest dark blue dress that somehow made her look both respectable and beautiful. "You look different," Hayes said, aware that it was inadequate. I feel different, Olivia replied. I feel like myself again. That night, Blake fed them a proper meal while they reviewed Olivia's testimony. Hayes listened as she recounted everything, from her father's death to stealing the papers to her desperate flight up the mountain. She was clear and precise, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "You will do well tomorrow," Blake assured her. "Just tell the truth. Lie as you told me, and the judge will see that justice is served." Hayes was less certain. He had seen too many powerful men escape consequences for their actions, too many times when the truth did not matter as much as money and influence. But he kept his doubts to himself and focused instead on making sure Olivia was ready. The next morning, they dressed carefully. Hayes wore his cleanest clothes, which were still rough and worn, but at least presentable. Olivia wore the borrowed dress and pinned her hair up in a simple style. Blake wore his best suit and carried a leather folder containing all the evidence. The courthouse was the imposing brick building in the center of Sacramento. They arrived early and found seats in the courtroom, which was already filling with people waiting for their cases to be heard. Hayes sat close to Olivia, offering silent support, while Blake spoke with the clerk about adding their case to the docket. Judge Morrison was a tall man with iron gray hair and sharp eyes. He listened to several other cases first, ruling on property disputes and mining claim arguments with what seemed to Hayes like fairness and wisdom. When Blake stood and announced Olivia Zimmerman's claim, a murmur went through the courtroom. "Your Honor," Blake began, "I represent Miss Zimmerman in a case of fraud and theft regarding the Highland mine in Sierra City. Her father, Thomas Zimmerman, was half-owner of that mine until his death 6 months ago. His partner, Victor Gaines, has claimed sole ownership based on falsified documents. We have evidence that proves Mr. Zimmerman's ownership and Mr. Gaines's fraud." Judge Morrison leaned forward. "This is a serious accusation, Mr. Blake. I assume you have substantial proof?" "We do, Your Honor." "Very well. Present your case." Blake laid out the evidence methodically, starting with the original partnership papers and progressing through the falsified documents they had recovered. He called Olivia to testify, and she stood and walked to the witness stand with her head high. Hayes watched her tell her story, watched the judge's expression shift from skeptical to interested to outraged. She spoke clearly about her father's death, about discovering Gaines's theft, about taking the papers and fleeing for her life. She described the 3 men who had chased her, described hiding in Hayes's stable, described the long journey to Sacramento. "And this man?" Judge Morrison asked, pointing to Hayes. "He helped you reach Sacramento?" "Yes, Your Honor. He saved my life multiple times over. Without him, I would be dead, and Victor Gaines would have gotten away with murder and theft." "Strong words, Miss Zimmerman. Do you have proof that Mr. Gaines murdered your father?" "No, Your Honor, but my father was healthy and strong, and his death was sudden and convenient for Mr. Gaines. I believe he was poisoned, but I cannot prove it." Judge Morrison nodded slowly. "Suspicion is not evidence, but fraud certainly is. Mr. Blake, how do you propose we proceed? Mr. Gaines is not here to defend himself against these accusations. I request that Your Honor issue a warrant for Mr. Gaines's arrest and seizure of his assets pending investigation. The evidence is clear that he committed fraud. The question of murder can be investigated separately." The judge considered this. "I am inclined to agree. However, I want to hear from one more witness before I make my ruling. Mr. Rourke, please approach." Hayes stood, surprised, and walked to the witness stand. Judge Morrison studied him carefully. "Mr. Rourke, you live in the mountains above Sierra City. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you sheltered Miss Zimmerman when she came to you for help?" "Yes." 3 men came to your property looking for her, according to her testimony. Did you lie to them about her presence?" Hayes met the judge's eyes. "I did." "Why?" "Because they meant to kill her, and I could not let that happen." "You risked your life and your property for a stranger. Why?" Hayes glanced at Olivia, then back at the judge. "Because it was the right thing to do, because I have spent too many years hiding from the world, and I was tired of letting bad things happen without trying to stop them, and because I believed her when she said she was innocent." Judge Morrison nodded. "An honest answer. Thank you, Mr. Rourke. You may step down." The judge reviewed the papers on his desk for several long minutes while the courtroom waited in tense silence. Finally, he looked up. "I have seen enough corruption in this territory to last a lifetime," he said. "I have seen good people destroyed by powerful men who believe themselves above the law. This case is particularly egregious. The evidence Mr. Blake has presented is compelling and clear. Therefore, I am ruling in favor of Miss Zimmerman. She is the rightful half-owner of the Highland mine, and all profits from the mine for the past 6 months are to be held pending full accounting and restitution." He banged his gavel. "Furthermore, I am issuing a warrant for Victor Gaines's arrest on charges of fraud and theft. U.S. Marshal, please execute this warrant immediately." A marshal standing near the door nodded and left the courtroom. Judge Morrison continued, "Miss Zimmerman, I am sorry for your loss and for what you have endured. I hope this ruling brings you some measure of justice." "Thank you, Your Honor," Olivia said, her voice shaking with emotion. They left the courthouse in a daze. Blake was jubilant, already planning how to take control of the mine and ensure Gaines could not destroy any more evidence. Hayes simply focused on getting Olivia somewhere quiet where she could process what had just happened. They ended up in a small park near the river. Olivia sat on a bench and Hayes sat beside her, waiting while she stared at the water. "I did not think we would actually win," she said finally. "I hoped, but I did not believe it was possible." "You won because you were brave enough to fight," Hayes told her. "You won because you did not give up." "We won," Olivia corrected. "I could not have done this without you." "What will you do now?" Hayes asked, though he dreaded the answer. She had her mind back, had her father's legacy restored. She would need to return to Sierra City, take control of the business, build the life she wanted. There was no room in that life for a mountain man who preferred solitude. Olivia turned to look at him, her amber eyes serious. "I have been thinking about that. Jonathan can manage the mine for me. He is honest and capable, and he knows the business. I will need to be involved, of course, but I do not need to live in Sierra City. I could live anywhere, even in a cabin in the mountains if someone there wanted me." Hope flared in Hayes's chest. "Are you sure? It is a hard life, isolated and simple." "I grew up in mining camps, Hayes. I know about hard lives, and I have spent the last 2 weeks with you, learning who you are and how you live. I do not want to lose that. I do not want to lose you." "You love me," Hayes said, needing to hear it. "Yes," Olivia replied without hesitation. "I love you. I think I started falling for you the moment you carried me into your cabin and chose to protect me instead of turning me over. I love your strength and your kindness and your quiet honor. I love the way you see the world and the way you make me feel safe. So yes, Hayes Rourke, I love you completely." Hayes pulled her into his arms and kissed her, not caring that they were in public, not caring about anything except the woman in his embrace and the future that suddenly seemed possible. "I love you too," he said against her lips. "I have loved you since you looked at me with those amber eyes and asked me not to give you up. I will never give you up, Olivia. Never." They held each other while the river flowed past and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and refused to let go. Over the next few days, they worked with Blake to secure Olivia's claim and set up management of the mine. The marshal arrested Gaines in Sierra City without incident, and the investigation into Thomas Zimmerman's death was officially opened. Blake took control of mine operations and immediately began implementing fair practices and proper accounting. Olivia signed papers giving Blake power of attorney to manage the day-to-day operations while she retained ownership. The mine was producing well, and Blake estimated it would provide Olivia with a comfortable income for many years to come. "You can have your school," Hayes told her. "We can build it near the cabin, bring in families from the mining camps for lessons. You can teach, and I can help maintain the building and provide security." Olivia's face lit up. "You would do that? You would give up your solitude?" "I have had enough solitude to last a lifetime. I want noise and laughter and children running around. I want a life with you, whatever that life looks like." They made plans as they traveled back toward the mountains. They would marry in a small ceremony in Sacramento, with Blake as their witness. They would return to Hayes's cabin and spend the winter there, just the two of them, learning to be together. In the spring, they would start building the school, reaching out to mining families and offering education to children who otherwise would have none. The wedding was simple and perfect. Olivia wore a new dress of soft green that made her eyes shine like gold, and Hayes wore new clothes that Blake had insisted on buying for him. Blake stood with them before a minister, and Hayes slipped a simple gold band on Olivia's finger, promising to love and protect her for the rest of his days. "You are mine now," he told her after the ceremony, his voice rough with emotion. "And you are mine," Olivia replied, touching his face gently. "Forever." They spent their wedding night in a hotel, the first real bed they had shared, and Hayes discovered that loving Olivia was even better than he had imagined. She was passionate and giving, matching his intensity with her own, and when they finally lay tangled together in the darkness, Hayes felt complete in a way he never had before. The journey back to the cabin took 10 days, but this time it was a journey of joy rather than desperation. They rode side by side, talking and laughing, stopping whenever they wanted to admire the view or steal kisses in the privacy of the wilderness. Hayes showed Olivia his favorite places, shared his knowledge of the mountains, and watched as she fell in love with his isolated valley. When they finally reached the cabin, Hayes dismounted and lifted Olivia down from her horse, carrying her across the threshold while she laughed and protested that she could walk perfectly well. "Let me have this," he said, setting her down inside. "Let me do things properly." "You have done everything properly," Olivia assured him. "You have been perfect from the moment I met you." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Olivia took over the cabin, adding small touches that made it feel like a home rather than just a shelter. She organized Hayes's supplies, mended his clothes, and cooked meals that were far better than anything he had managed on his own. In turn, Hayes made sure she was warm and safe, taught her to shoot and hunt, and held her each night while they talked about their plans. Winter came early that year, bringing deep snow that isolated them completely from the outside world. Hayes had been worried that Olivia would feel trapped or bored, but she seemed to thrive in the quiet solitude. She read from the few books Hayes owned, practiced shooting until she could hit a target reliably, and spent hours planning the school they would build in the spring. "We will need at least 2 rooms," she told Hayes one evening as they sat by the fire. "One for younger children, one for older. We will teach reading, writing, arithmetic, history, maybe science if I can find the right books." "You will be a wonderful teacher," Hayes said, pulling her close. "Those children will be lucky to have you." "We could have children of our own, too," Olivia said, looking up at him with a mixture of hope and shyness. "If you want them." Hayes felt his heart expand. "I want them. I want everything with you." Spring came eventually, melting the snow and opening the trails. Hayes and Olivia made the trip down to Sacramento to check on the mine and collect the funds Olivia would need for the school. Blake reported that operations were going well and that Gaines had been sentenced to 10 years in prison for fraud. The investigation into Thomas Zimmerman's death had not yielded enough evidence for murder charges, but at least Gaines was behind bars. "Your father would be proud of you," Blake told Olivia. "You fought for his legacy and won." "I had help," Olivia said, smiling at Hayes. They used some of the mine profits to purchase building materials and supplies, then returned to the cabin and began construction. Hayes did most of the heavy work, his powerful frame perfectly suited for raising walls and beams, while Olivia handled the detailed finish work. Neighbors from the surrounding mountains heard about the school and came to help, and by late summer, they had a sturdy building with 2 large rooms, a stone fireplace, and rows of benches for students. Olivia sent word to mining camps throughout the region, offering free education to any child who could reach the school. The response was overwhelming. By the time the first term began in September, she had 23 students ranging in age from 6 to 15. Hayes watched his wife teach with fierce pride. She was patient and enthusiastic, making learning an adventure rather than a chore. The children adored her, and their parents were grateful beyond words. Several families moved closer to the school, building cabins in the valley, and suddenly Hayes's isolated sanctuary was becoming a small community. He found he did not mind. In fact, He enjoyed having neighbors, enjoyed the sound of children's laughter echoing through the valley, enjoyed being part of something larger than himself. The war had taken his family and his faith in humanity, but Olivia had given both back to him. That winter, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. Hayes was terrified and ecstatic in equal measure, hovering over her and trying to make sure she did not overexert herself. Olivia bore his protectiveness with amused patience, assuring him that she was perfectly healthy and that women had been having babies for thousands of years. Their son was born in early spring, delivered with the help of 2 women from the new community. Hayes held the tiny, squalling infant and felt tears streaming down his face. "We will name him Thomas," he said, looking at Olivia, "after your father and my brother, so they are both remembered." "Thomas Rourke," Olivia said, smiling through her exhaustion. "It is perfect." Baby Thomas was indeed perfect, with his mother's amber eyes and his father's dark hair. Hayes discovered that fatherhood suited him. He loved everything about his son, from the way he grabbed Hayes's finger with surprising strength to the way he fell asleep on Hayes's chest, trusting and content. The school continued to thrive. Olivia took a few months away after Thomas's birth, but soon returned to teaching with the baby sleeping in a basket beside her desk. The older students helped watch the younger ones, and the community came together to support each other in ways that reminded Hayes of his childhood farm. 2 years after Thomas was born, Olivia gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. She had her mother's delicate features and her father's quiet intensity. Hayes was besotted with both his children, and Olivia often teased him about being too soft. "You let them get away with everything," she said, though her tone was affectionate. "They are children. They are supposed to get away with some things. You were the one who wanted to be strict about behavior. That was before I had children of my own. Now I understand that rules are merely suggestions." Olivia laughed and kissed him, and Hayes thought about how far they had both come from that desperate night when he found her in his stable. The years passed in a blur of happiness. The school grew, eventually requiring a second building to accommodate all the students. The community expanded as more families moved to the valley, drawn by the promise of education and safety. Hayes and Olivia became pillars of this small society, respected and loved by everyone who knew them. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Rose was more adventurous, always exploring the mountains and bringing home injured animals for her father to heal. Hayes taught both children to ride and shoot and survive in the wilderness, while Olivia made sure they could read and write and think critically. When Thomas was 10 and Rose was 8, Olivia gave birth to twin boys they named Samuel and James. Hayes was 52 by then, with his dark hair threaded with silver, but he felt younger than he had in decades. His family filled the cabin with noise and love, and every day he gave thanks for the woman who had stumbled into his stable and changed his entire life. The mine continued to produce steady income, managed expertly by Jonathan Blake until his retirement, then by a man Blake had trained personally. Olivia used the profits to expand the school, to provide scholarships for students who wanted to continue their education beyond what she could offer, and to support the growing community. Victor Gaines died in prison, unmourned except perhaps by the few people who had profited from his corruption. Olivia felt nothing when she heard the news except relief that he could never threaten her family. On their 20th anniversary, Hayes took Olivia on a picnic to the meadow where they had first kissed. Their children were old enough to be left with neighbors for an afternoon, and Hayes wanted time alone with his wife. They sat on a blanket and ate cheese and bread and fresh berries, just as they had eaten on their journey to Sacramento all those years ago. Olivia leaned against Hayes's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, "giving up the chance to live in a city to have an easier life?" "Never," Olivia said firmly. "This is exactly the life I wanted, even if I did not know it until I found you. You gave me everything, Hayes. Love, family, purpose, a home. How could I possibly regret any of that?" "I was so alone before you," Hayes admitted. "I thought that was what I wanted, but I was just hiding from pain. You taught me that life is worth living, even when it hurts, even when it is hard. You taught me to hope again." "We taught each other," Olivia said, tilting her face up to kiss him. "We saved each other." They made love in the meadow, under the open sky, with the mountains standing silent witness around them. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the warm sun, talking about their children and their plans and all the years still ahead of them. Thomas went on to become a lawyer, using his education to fight for justice, just as his mother had fought for her father's legacy. Rose married a rancher and had 6 children of her own, filling her house with the same love and chaos she had known growing up. Samuel became a doctor, drawn to healing after watching his father care for injured animals and neighbors. James took over management of the mine, proving to have his grandfather's eye for ore and his grandmother's head for business. Hayes and Olivia watched their children grow and thrive, watched their grandchildren fill the valley with new life and energy. The school Olivia had founded continued long after she retired from teaching, run by former students who had been inspired by her dedication. They grew old together, Hayes's hair turning completely silver, while Olivia's faded from dark blonde to soft white. His hands, once so powerful, became gnarled with arthritis, but they still held hers every night. Her amber eyes remained bright and sharp, and her mind stayed keen even as her body grew frail. On their 50th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin for a massive celebration. Hayes looked around at the crowd of people, all of them connected to him and Olivia, all of them proof that 2 desperate people finding each other in the darkness could create something lasting and beautiful. "Did you ever imagine this?" Thomas asked his father, gesturing at the assembled family. "When you were living alone up here, did you imagine any of this?" Hayes thought about the man he had been, bitter and isolated, convinced that his life was over at 32. He thought about the sound of ragged breathing in his stable, the decision to protect rather than expose, the journey that had brought him everything he never knew he needed. "No," he said honestly, "I could not have imagined this, but I am grateful for every moment of it." Olivia found him later, away from the crowd, standing at the edge of the meadow and looking out over the valley. She slipped her hand into his and they stood together in comfortable silence. "Thank you," Hayes said. "For what?" "For falling asleep in my stable, for trusting me, for loving me, for giving me a life worth living." Olivia smiled, the same smile that had captured his heart 50 years earlier. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for keeping me hidden. Thank you for being brave enough to fight for me when I could not fight for myself." "I would do it all again," Hayes said. "Every moment, every hardship, every mile. I would do it all again to end up exactly here, with you." "As would I, my love. As would I." They stood together as the sun set over the mountains, 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. The valley spread out before them, dotted with cabins and fields, alive with the sounds of family and community. Hayes Rourke had come to these mountains to hide from the world, to nurse his wounds in solitude and isolation, but Olivia Zimmerman had found him anyway, had crashed into his life with her desperation and her determination and her bright amber eyes, and she had taught him that hiding was not the same as living. They had saved each other that night in the stable, and they continued saving each other every day afterward, through love and faith and the simple choice to keep choosing each other no matter what challenges arose. It was the greatest adventure either of them could have imagined, and it started with 3 desperate men chasing a woman through the darkness, with a mountain man who chose to be a hero when he could have looked away, and with a love story written in the Wild West that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. As the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge overhead, Hayes and Olivia walked back to their cabin hand in hand, ready for whatever time they had left together, grateful for every moment they had already shared, and completely, absolutely, perfectly in love.